Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Soroka, and I am the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And on behalf of myself and the museum, I would like to welcome you all to the second in our virtual program series, The Production of the Self, Conversations about Marisa Merz, which is organized by myself and Dr. Lara Conte, the Marcello Ruma Fellow in Contemporary Italian Art. Lara's waving hello to you all. Featuring the perspectives of a number of international scholars and curators we've invited them all to address the life and the legacy of the pioneering Italian artist, Marisa Merz. This series is taking place every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. from now until October 21st. A special thank you to those of you who were here with us last week as we kicked off the series with the PhilaMuseum curator, Connie Butler, who paved an incredibly thoughtful introduction and insight into the mostly private life of Marisa Merz. And we hope you'll stay with us for this journey through the end of October. But before we jump into the agenda for today and introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Lara Conte, I would like to quickly address a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice that you are currently muted. During the presentation portion, we're going to keep everyone muted until we enter the conversational Q&A aspect of the event, which is going to take place immediately after Lara's presentation. That said, if you have any questions or comments or just encouragement that you want to share, you're welcome to use the Zoom chat function. So just click on that chat tab and it should open up for you. We're going to be monitoring these questions throughout the presentation and hopefully do our best to address your questions and comments during the Q&A session. I should also note that today's session is being recorded, but the final recording will only include the introduction and the presentation sections and not the Q&A. So feel free to ask questions and speak freely. We want everyone to feel comfortable sharing whatever questions and comments that they have. The entire series is actually going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing these back with all of you at the end of the series, with much thanks to our colleagues at the Italian Cultural Institute of New York who have offered to put this on their website, so you'll be able to access the events and rewatch today's event or others going into the end of October. With that said, I also want to point out that this virtual program has been organized in conjunction with the artist room dedicated to Marisa Merz at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I was fortunate to get to work on that with our senior curator of contemporary art, Carlos Basualdo. And now that the museum's doors have recently reopened, we're thrilled to be able to welcome people back to experience these work in person. That said, you'll see some images of the installation here in this PowerPoint just to give you a little taste of the work. Chronicling various material and thematic preoccupations across Marisa Merz's practice, this room in our galleries was made possible with much thanks to the collaboration of the artist during her lifetime, as well as Marisa's daughter, Beatrice, the Fondazione Merz and Gladstone Gallery, along with a host of lenders, including Augustine Coupel, Leo Katz, Glenstone, and the Fondazione. Merz occupies a very unique and pivotal position in post-war European art, combining this really keen attention to materials along with a deeply personal symbolism. She is also the sole woman artist who's affiliated with Arte Povera, which was a term coined in 1967 to describe a group of artists whose work emphasized process and the use of unconventional materials in an attempt to connect art and life. Much of the scholarship and curatorial work that catalyzed what we know as Arte Povera today is indebted to the work of the late Germano Ciolan, whose impact on our field will continue to be felt even after his recent passing. Reflecting on an ongoing exploration of the tensions between the private and the public, the spiritual and the profane, Merz was often using malleable materials throughout her works. You see in these images copper wire, wax, unfired clay. All of these elements are either knotted, woven, recombined, or reused in some way, shape, or form. Techniques that are often linked to craft and female labor. But Merz insistently subverts these stereotypes of the feminine and the maternal through incorporating heavy materials and industrial paints. all of these aspects we hope to dive deeper into through this series. And one of those aspects, not included in this installation, but Lara will talk about today. As Connie Butler elaborated on last week, for so many years, Merz remained rather elusive in refraining from both dating her artwork, which continues to make it something to investigate today, and presenting it in traditional exhibition settings. So having it in a gallery presentation like what we have is rather unique as opposed to how it was often presented. And I think that the selective participation in the larger art system also is part of this kind of desire to maintain the connection between art and life and not see them as two separate things. We'll talk a little bit today about the role of her kitchen and this understanding of her artwork. And we're fortunate to have with us Lara Conte, who is joining us from Rome. Hello, Lara. Lara is presenting on Merz's sculptural and film experiments in the kitchen from 1967 to 1968. By way of introduction, Lara is an associate professor of contemporary art history at the Department of Philosophy, Communication, and Performing Arts at the University of Rome. Specific aspects of her research include arte povera, antiform, and process art, as well as Italian post-war art, with a specific focus on bringing to light lesser-known currents and alternative narratives in the areas of visual arts and criticism. Among recent and recognized publications that Lara has worked on include Materia, Corpo, Azione, which focuses on artistic processes and exchanges between Europe and the US from 1966 to 1970, 2 publications on the work of critic and activist Carla Lonzi, and a forthcoming publication with Francesca Gallo titled Italian Artists and Moving Images, Identity, Gaze, and Experimentation. That is the English title for the book. As a reminder, following Lara's presentation, we are going to have time for Q&A, and we hope to wrap up by 1 o'clock. So thank you for joining us in your lunch hour. Before passing the screen over to Lara, I do want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the supporters who made this specific online program possible for us. A special thank you to the Consulate General of Italy in Philadelphia, the Italian Cultural Institute of New York, and the Daniel W. Dietrich II Fund for Excellence in Contemporary Art. Without further ado, I will pass the screen over to you, Lara, to share with us about experiments in the kitchen.
I would like to thank Amanda Sroka and Lara De Mori for the invitation to this study day, and I thank Beatrice Merz and Fondazione Merz for the help in research and materials, and thank you to all participants today. On the occasion of Marisa Merz retrospective exhibition at Met, the film La Conta, The Count, made in 1967, has re-emerged among the artist's documents and materials. You can see. Marisa Merz filmic experimentation is a part of the artist's research yet to be analyzed, shrouded in mystery like so many other aspects of her production. Although Marisa Merz's work has been at the center of important exhibition events in recent years, many questions remain unanswered regarding the dating of the work and the exhibition chronology, but also more broadly regarding her training and the late artistic starting. A few traces dispersed in rarefied bibliographic documentation allow us to frame the living sculpture, her first plastic creation made of aluminum slats cut and stapled to create organic and proliferating forming space. As Connie Butler also pointed out, the title seems to refer to the living theater, which made its first appearance in Turin with the Connection, staged at Teatro Carignano on June 1961. Based on conversation with Beatrice Merz, I was also able to learn about Judith Malina's and Julian Beck's frequentation of the Merz family in those years. The living sculptures were absolutely unexpected in the Italian art scene of the time. According to Tommaso Trini, one of the most sensitive critics of the time, they were a sort of anticipatory attempt at a new plastic syntax aimed at exploring subjective dimension of research and the new temporality of doing. Piero Gilardi, who in those years was engaged in creating a series of international contacts among artists in micromotive art direction, quickly put them in relation to funk art of American West Coast and to eccentric abstraction presented by Lucy Lippard in New York in 1966. The living sculpture were set up in the studio home of Merz couple and were published for the first time on Marca Tre magazine in December 1966, accompanying an interview with the artist. The dialogue drew attention to these unusual sculpture forms even before they were presented publicly in 1967 in various exhibition contests in Turin, such as at Museo Sperimentale at Galleria Civica d'Arte Moderna, the collection of which included the work you see, and in the sole exhibition at Sperone Gallery in June and at Piper Club in December. The Marca Tre magazine published 2 photographs showing the living sculpture in a domestic environment and outdoors in a park in which 2 forms are suspended on the branches of a tree and one spreads firmlessly on the lawn in an atmosphere reminiscent of the outdoor festival of Gutai, which in post-informal Turin were the object of timely information dissemination through Michel Tapier. Marisa Merz's precious reflection collected on Marca Tre highlight both the continuity and the divergence of her artistic design, which starting from the pictorial form and the 2-dimensionality of the painting, touches the space as a natural propensity of a dynamic tendency of the visual experience towards the lived experience. Indeed, in the second half of the 60s, Marisa Merz, as a still unknown painter, began to explore space and time through the experimentation of a new extra-pictorial languages that also allow her to direct the artistic object from the artwork to work. This distinction could be related to think of Hannah Arendt, who in The Human Condition says, unlike the artwork was and is reached when the object is finished and ready to be added to the common world of things, the work always moves within the same circle prescribed by the biological process of living organism. In this dimension of extra-pictorial experimentation, on the one hand, there is a plastic action carried out precisely by means of anti-canonical, humble and modest gestures, which activate one's own mode of rapture in terms of experience as a technique of life, according to what Marisa Merz says. On the other hand, there is a filmic experimentation at a time when a new generation of Italian filmmakers and visual artists were renewing film formats in relation to the diffusion of portable, easier to use and cheaper instruments, and more widely because of the impact coming from American underground cinema, the living theater revolution and the beat culture. This implies a passage through languages that goes beyond the division and the fusion of the arts in the immediacy of life, thereby spreading new creative imagery and new alternative models of life. It is therefore precisely in this scenario of dual domestic, sculptural, and cinematic experimentation that Marisa Merz became an artist. Starting from this specific contextualization, my contribution aims at exploring the central themes of the artist's research, such as autobiography and temporality of a plastic process, in relation to or in parallel with the use of the cinematic medium. On the basis of a phenomenological reading, the aim is to highlight possible visual and informative suggestions and to trace hypothetical genealogies in a convergence of art, cinema, literature, and social history that places Marisa Merz's artistic radicality between feminine imagination and proto-feminist tensions. From the little documentation available, we can reconstruct and imagine Marisa Merz's experience as a filmmaker, contextualizing it with the atmosphere of Turin's experimental cinema during that exciting season of openness among languages, codes, and scenarios that in a few years rendered Turin a crucial center of the international artistic avant-garde. The adventure of Turin's experimental cinema drew considerable impetus from the festival dedicated to New American Cinema, held in the city in May 1967. More than 60 films of the American underground presented by Jonas Mekas were shown at Galleria Civica d'Arte Moderna. In his presentation, Mekas referred to a poetic cinema which redefines the syntax and language of cinema. By recovering the legacy of surrealism and constantly mixing arts, New American Cinema developed a personal cinema based on self-expression that brings attention to the private, the domestic, and the autobiographical. Young Turin-based filmmakers such as Renato Ferraro, Gabriele Oriani, Paolo Menzio, and Tonino De Bernardi remember the New American Cinema Festival as a collective shock, a prompt to proceed with the experiments already underway for someone, and a real initiation into a new expressive modes and sensibilities with regard to cinematic medium for others. Indeed, 1967 was the year in which the underground penetrated in Italy. In January 1968, Michelangelo Pistoletto opened his studio hosting the Ombre Elettriche Festival. The series of projections brought together the materials of the filmmakers working in the city, including Tonino De Bernardi, Il Mostro Verde, The Green Monster, a true manifesto of underground, made with the painter Paolo Menzio, and among others, Antonio Delle Nevi, Antonio of the Snows, by Pia Epremian, the only woman in the experimental group in Turin, close to Merz couple, who in her research explored themes linked to private and the existential dimension, female identity, and the centrality of the body. In March 1968, Pistoletto shared the two final evenings of his solo exhibition at Attico Gallery in Rome with filmmakers from Turin. Starting from consideration of the exhibition as a place of sharing, reformulation of authorship, and an operational modality linked to the idea of a community, the artist proposed to work with him. During the exhibition, 10 short films were made, almost all shot in Pistoletto studio in Turin, based on action or involved in relationship between artist and filmmaker. Among them was a short film by Marisa Merz, was a name which is linked to the experimental cinema scene in Turin, appeared for the first time in this occasion, as you can see. Like other materials of this, it has unfortunately been lost. Therefore, the only information we have comes from Pistoletto's memories, and so we can say that it was not La Conta. According to Pistoletto's memory, we know that Marisa Merz had placed him upside down, leaning against a wall, and had asked him to answer a few questions, while a magnetophone in front of the artist recorded his words. Marisa Merz behind the camera recorded the action. The same program was presented in May 1968 at the Wolfgang Museum in Essen. In February and March 1968, the first Festival of Italian Independent Cinema, presented by Paolo Bertetto and Gabriele Oriani, was held at Unione Culturale in Turin. Among the materials, there were the screening of 3 films by Marisa Merz: La Conta, The Count, La Lampadina, the light bulb, and I Piselli, the piece. Another documentary trace on Marisa Merz's brief experiments with cinema is linked to Gennaio 70, Comportamenti, Progetti, Mediazioni, terza biennale della Giovane Pittura in Bologna. Indeed, the list of the video recordings of actions projected during the exhibition includes Marisa Merz, Antibiotico, registrazione con oggetto di cera e sintesi elettrica, last 5 minutes. Antibiotic, recording with wax, object, and electrical synthesis. Marisa Merz's only film found to date is therefore La Conta, which could be part of a sort of trilogy along with I Piselli and La Lampadina. The film, shot in 16 millimeters, is disarming due to its radical simplicity, as you can see. It depicts the artist at her kitchen table while opening a jar of canned food, from which she extracts and counts peas, which she places on a plate with a ritual gesture. It is not known whether the fixed camera was placed on a tripod or someone was filming. The set is the kitchen of Merz couple's home studio. In a nocturnal and surreal atmosphere, one can see in the background, as in a sort of cave, the living sculpture, which during 1967 experienced a twofold spread, namely through a series of exhibition events we mentioned, but also through their cinematographic temporalization. In addition to La Conta, there is also Il Mostro Verde, where a long scene is indeed set in the metallic landscape of living sculpture, which symbolizes the twisted entrails of the monster. An in-depth reading proposed by was proposed by Teresa Kittler in the catalog Marisa Merz, The Sky is a Great Space. Precisely in relation to the Mostro Verde, we can point out that Merz family's house was at the time a place of meeting, sharing, and sidestepping. 1967, the year of La Conta and Il Mostro Verde, was when Ugo Nespolo realized Neomerzare on the neon by Mario Merz. Tonino De Bernardi recalls frequenting the Merz family's house when the space of art and life were completely questioned. Known shots, those of Il Mostro Verde, but also unpublished materials record in a continuous cycle of the evening in the Merz household. In this context of dialogue and experimentation, Marisa Merz approached the camera for a brief creative period, identified cinema as a congenial medium along with plastic experimentation. The cinematic medium and the use of practice based on cutting and sewing are ways to escape from the codified languages of sculpture and painting to explore the biological time of existence. In her sculptural works, such as Scarpette, the autobiographical element is related to measuring of the body. In La Conta, it is expressed in the artist's acting presence and action. Tonino De Bernardi has a vague recollection of Marisa Merz's cinematic experiments. In his memory, La Conta is associated with another image of counting, or rather another memory of Marisa regarding her stay with Mario in Switzerland in the early 60s, when Marisa spent her days counting grass blades. This image is present in the memories of both Mario and Marisa Merz to the point of becoming confused and overlapping. Indeed, Mario Merz, during his conversation with Germano Celant in 1971, talked about grass drawings. From the space of nature to the domestic space, the dimension of counting as a measurement of time, primordial and somehow paradoxical gesture, is central in La Conta. Counting is for Marisa Merz the primary way to get in touch with the world, in a dimension poised between physical concreteness and surreal suspension. It is the first gesture whereby children become aware of an abstraction by connecting it to a physical gesture. Indeed, the very term conta, the Italian version of any, many, many, mu, refers to childhood. Merz counting, like the other sculptural gestures, noting, sewing, stapling, is based on repetition. This repetition can be read in relation to authenticity in a way that Heidegger in Being and Time describe as in pre-running, being there repeats itself in its very own being able to be in front of. Authentic have been is what we call repetition. These repetitive gestures trace a matrilinear genealogy, but at the same time infuse a vital, disruptive lymph into the present, reformulating a new vision of creativity. This position is clarified, in my opinion, in some notes by Merz for an interview with Mirella Bandini on the NAC magazine in 1972, which however remained unpublished until these years. E we can read. Che cos'è l'artista nel mondo di oggi? Io sono l'artista. Relativamente a cosa? Cerco qualcosa di diverso da quanto la produzione corrente investa le menti e l'energia degli uomini. La qualità di questo qualcosa di diverso, la mia qualità. Allora, what is the artist in today's world? I am the artist. Relative to what? I'm looking for something different from what current production fills the minds and energy of people with. The quality of this different something, my quality. Starting from the uniqueness of her own autobiography from the late 60s onwards, Merz pulverized a symbolic order determined by external legitimizing gaze to expose herself to the world in a different subjectivity. She portrayed herself through a gesture that belonged to her against the backdrop of her sculptures and in the domestic environment in which she recognized herself as a mother, wife, and artist. One aspect to be highlighted in relation to La Conta is the reinvention of the kitchen space as a place in which to redefine a vision of the feminine and the artistic. Various ideas converge, in my opinion, in placing the radical nature of the feminine and Merz domestic space, which also help to lead a definition often used and misleading for her poetics, that of intimacy, towards a deeper and more problematic transformative practice and a sort of knowledge connected to her gesture. In the exhibition at Met, Connie Butler, Teresa Kittler, and Lucia read Marisa Merz's research in relation to the emergence of a new feminist sensibility in the Italian context of the 60s, although Marisa Merz did not take part in women's militant movements. Lucia Ray in particular drew attention to the thought of Betty Friedan and her text, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963 and promptly translated in Italian in 1964. This book has been considered a sort of a watershed in the history of American women, and it also had a great impact in Italy. With the expression of feminine mystique, activist Betty Friedan identifies cultural construction as an ideal to be conformed if the woman wants to feel integrated in society, a closed and organic model of feminine life and happiness, including love, children, husband, and home. The landscape that Friedan describes is what Imma Fiorino recently defines as the family as a defensive bulwark and the home as a nest, namely ethical values that were renewed during the Cold War, fomented by the fear of atomic weapons, and also as a fascist legacy in Italy. With respect to an understanding of domestic life as a space of freedom for women granted by consumer goods in Italy of the economic boom, La Conta can actually be considered as a sidestep leading to the redefinition of the domestic condition, in deculturalization of gestures and in contextualizing them within a pre-industrial kitchen dimension where the signs of modernization become residual trace on a par with the bodily fragments that Merz scatters around the world. In the surreal atmosphere of her kitchen studio, accentuated by the nocturnal lighting and the visceral shapes of the living sculptures, Merz can experience her being a wife, mother, and artist. It is a kitchen that has nothing to do with the American style that circulated in the Hollywood movies and magazines of the time, with pretty, smiling, perfectly combed women with makeup, busy cooking, far removed from the image of the miracle kitchen and the idea of a family shelter that responds to a sort of conformism where traditional gender roles can exercise doubts and fears. However, Marisa Merz's imagination also feeds on other suggestions and affinities that may have settled in her creative universe, breaking with the schemes and roles around the space of the house and the kitchen, which also starts from a deep creative exchange with Mario and the couple's propensity in the cultural Turin of the mid-60s to define a new art of life. In this context, in addition to living theater and the new American cinema, witnessed the impact caused by the Beat generation. In March 1966, the same Domus issues on which modern kitchens, icons of design and the most advanced technology were showed it. So Fernanda Pivano and Ettore Sozzas published a report in which they recounted their journey to San Francisco and their encounter with Beat Generation. They spoke of nights spent in friends' home where meatless gestures are consumed within themselves, one inside the other. These are places that speak of an everyday life where daily routine takes on the value of another mythology. These are stories, cultural suggestions, alternative models of life that nourish the Merz couple's creativity and their way of experiencing both the private space of the house and the public space of the exhibition. In relation to Domus, there is a particular visual affinity between the photographs taken by Sozzas and those that document the hippie atmosphere of the happening that Marisa set up a year later at Piper Club, an event of which a valuable description was found in a letter by Piero Gilardi to Paolo Icaro, an Italian artist who at the time lived in New York, which further justifies the comparison. The place was full of people with fantastic clothes. There were lots of flowers, Marisa's work hung from the walls, and the air was filled with incense. In short, it was a much more beautiful night than all the similar events I've seen around so far. Again, on Domus, this time on the April 1966 issue, Ettore Sozzas and Pierre Restany published a report dedicated to the latest trends in German contemporary art with some photographs of Beuys' house studio, the first occasion on which information on the work of German artists linked to Fluxus circulated in Italian magazines. Sozzas' captions accompanying the photographs read, "One of the most revolutionary artists who, strangely enough, is a professor of sculpture at Düsseldorf Academy. He lives as he thinks and works with his wife, children, studio, kitchen, last year's Christmas tree, clocks hanging from the ceiling, clothes hanging on the wall, a grand piano, objects and buildings in a constant happening atmosphere. It is therefore in this transatlantic atmosphere of new domestic and creative imagery, in a particular oscillation between memory and contingency, in the total overlap between art and life, that Marisa Merz rearticulated her artistic gesture and subjectivity, announcing from her own individual perspective crucial issues that would be at the center of 68 protests, the feminist movements of the 70s, and poverty research in part. In her sculptural and filmic activity, Merz places at the center of the discourse a politics of the self that ideally dialogues with a whole series of radical experimentalism by female artists in the kitchen, a space to be reinvented, or a place where everyday life degenerates into obsession, from the cinema to video to sculpture, in an extended geographical horizon, from Chantal Ackerman to Marta Rosler, from Marina Abramovic to Anna Maria Maiolino, to name but a few preliminary examples to be thematized. Thank you.